especially for running backs, it's all about guaranteed money because they're
Mhm.
almost definitely going to get hurt, and they really only have like 2 contracts, and then it's done.
Yeah.
Like that's why it sucks about Chubb. Like I don't, like I love him. He's like one of my favorite Browns ever, but at the end of the day, like they're gonna cut him at some point or trade him, and he's gonna be gone. Even though he's definitively like one of the best players that we've had like in the last decade.
Eh,
Man, it's
I
not a
don't
real high
know.
list.
No. I'm thinking
Uh,
about them like cutting him. I could see like if he comes back halfway through this season and like plays really well after the injury, I could see them like trying to move him.
yeah, they don't
But I
have
could
any good
also
running backs right now.
I could easily just as well see like him try to come back and like I mean it was a bad injury. Like if he's not the same, it wouldn't surprise me.
And he's already
And
had knee
then
surgery on his other
yeah,
knee, I think too.
and like so if the Browns like you know let him retire a Brown, that wouldn't be the most outlandish thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, he so if they trade or release him at any point this year, it's $4 million cap, and then they save 12 million. So like there's a, but and then he's a free agent next year. So it's kind
Oh,
of
okay.
that's
Yeah.
that's the thing is
Yeah.
he's pretty much,
Yeah. He'll
I think he's
probably
pretty much screwed with his contract at that point. But they don't have any good running backs like Ford, I think was their running back.
Ford's solid. He just doesn't. He's like a home run hitter. He'll have
Yeah.
one rush for 60 yards, and then he'll have 5 rushes after that for -5 yards.
Yeah. It's just that we need some, especially with who knows what happens with Watson. You gotta have a run game at some point. And Kareem is, he's awesome, but he's not a every down back anyway, so it doesn't really matter. This microphone will not stay up. All right. Make sure I have all this muted because that definitely happens like every other episode.
What?
You ready to get started? You ready to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello and welcome to episode 109 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we got a few OpTic matches that seem pretty notable. We have some OpTic related debate. I don't know what you would call what Ake says, but a lot of drama necessarily, and then we're just going to talk about some of the qualifying matches that happened over the last weekend in the Call of Duty League, and then we will give our predictions for the last week of qualifying matches for Major 2. It has been 78 years since we've had a LAN in Call of Duty, it feels like, but we're finally getting there, and we will get to the final week of qualifying matches at the end of the show to give our predictions. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Uh, you know, like you said, we're almost back to land, and that's the silver lining here. But we do have some juicy stuff to talk about today, so ready to hop right in.
Yeah, last week we had, it felt like 95% 3-0s and then maybe like a sprinkle of a 3-1. We started off with an actual 5-game series this past week. Friday, March 8th, started off with OpTic versus the Boston Breach. OpTic ends up winning this 3-2. It's still really impressive that Boston was able to push this not only to a game 5, but a game 5 round 11. So really could have went either way between these two teams. But OpTic comes out on top, as we typically expect with OpTic matches. Anything jump out to you right out of the gate with this OpTic versus Breach series?
I think it is notable what you just said in terms of the S&D. going to a game 5, round 11 in the series overall, but obviously that's a very close map to end the series.
Mhm.
And Boston won the map to S&D. That is notable when we get to the later series in OpTic. So listeners or viewers, just keep that in mind when we get to the later match, because I think it's more important to play that off of each other in terms of OpTic's 2 games here. But overall, I mean, the story right now in competitive Call of Duty, and essentially the story of this series, really was just the Shotzzy show, and him having, as I believe Dashy said, was it Dashy's quote that um that wasn't it. I must have put the wrong tweet in here. I think it was Dashy though who called it a masterclass performance uh out of Shotzzy in this series in particular, a 1.72
Mhm.
KD overall. Just absolutely ludicrous numbers. And I believe,
It was
uh,
Dashy, by the way.
okay, I don't know why I linked the wrong tweet or whatever, but he had 103 kills in this series too, which I came to find out after the fact um, was uh, when we get to a later series too, somebody had a chance to potentially break the kill record of the season so far, which is 104, set by Medals. So Shotzzy was 1 kill away from tying, 2 kills away from breaking that mark, which is something we've done on this show a while. I haven't really done it this year, keeping track of it personally, but now I'll know in my head that 104 is that mark to beat for at least a best of 5. So that was interesting. But yeah, really strong performance out of Shotzzy here. Um, there was the one thing I noted, which was pretty interesting about the series too. Obviously, strong performance in the hard point map one with a 100-point club where Shotzzy went 27-7, and then in the control, it was another 3-2 on invasion, but this time Boston got 0 ticks of progression on either control point in their first 2 offenses. So naturally, they had offense in round 5, and they were able to capture both zones fully in the overtime to win the map. So that was kind of just super weird. But then, you know, Shotzzy had another 30 bomb in map 4, like his 4th straight incredible hardpoint performance at this point. Because in the previous week, he against Carolina had 37 in map 1 and 43 in map 4. So especially in hardpoint, which obviously contributes to his large kill totals and the KD overall when you're putting up numbers like that in hardpoint, which is the Search and Destroy is played twice as well, but obviously not as many kills because it's not a respawn. When you're putting up numbers like that consistently in hardpoint, it's going to lead to pretty high kill totals and just a better KD overall, most likely. So that leads into the game 5, round 11, which honestly could have gone either way. Probably a different topic across the board. We're talking about if Boston's able to come away with that one, but OpTic seal the deal and get this win to kick off the week.
Yeah. Pretty incredible series, especially from Shotzzy. Um, I feel like it would probably be better to do the is Shotzzy a superstar thing when we talk about the OpTic versus Toronto, because that's more of like a championship level match between 2 contenders. But an incredible series from him. And, like I've said before, despite it being a really close series going down to around 11, the best teams typically find a way to win these series no matter what, and that's what OpTic did. Unfortunate for Boston because this would have been a really big win for them, especially having come back after getting 100-point clubbed in the opening hard point, and then to win that series would have been a really strong performance, but it was not meant to be. Next match we had Atlanta versus LAT. This was not nearly as close. We had a 3-0 from Atlanta. None of these maps were particularly close. It was a 76-point win on hardpoint, a 6-0 on Karachi S&D for FaZe, and a 3-1 control win on Karachi as well for FaZe. 6-0 on S&D. I know Atlanta's S&D was something that we had kind of mentioned on, I think, last week's episode, or maybe 2 weeks now. Whenever they lost, I think, two S&Ds. But I think there's no reason to worry about their search. Do you agree with that? Because I mean, the hard point is whatever because LAT is still, one of the worst hard point teams. Even this new roster, they seem improved, but I feel like the search is more of the telling point here for FaZe.
Yeah, so I didn't look into it honestly, but head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor was DMing me about it, and um, this is potentially a shot for Atlanta to either tie or break their previous CDL record for most S&D wins in a row, which he sent that to me, and I was kind of confused because again, I didn't look into it, but just off the top of my head, like I remember that Atlanta obviously lost two searches to Toronto in the grand finals of Major One.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is the potential for an S&D streak, it would be solely S&D like one in these qualifiers,
Yeah.
which is pretty impressive if that's the case. So I didn't look into it and I forgot until you just said it, but um, if that is even remotely close, even if it's not like, right at the mark of the record or tying it, breaking it, whatever, even if it's like somewhat close, that's kind of impressive considering what we had just said about them. I just mentioned losing to uh, the S&Ds to Toronto in the grand finals. That seems to it seems like every year there's like just like a blip in the radar for Atlanta where something's going on with S&D and then they flip the switch and they go into hyperdrive. So maybe it's a little earlier this year. Well, excuse me, maybe it's a little earlier than this year. Or, maybe it's just them starting to click. Obviously, new player Andraza joining in, so they have some chemistry and situational stuff to work on in an important mode like that. But yeah, definitely interesting if it is the case that Atlanta could be, it's as much as that core of Celium, Abizi, and Simp, as long as they're together, we're always talking about how strong they are at S&D. It would just be kind of impressive if this team is already potentially getting ready to reach the peaks of its S&D performance, if you consider this a record-breaking streak to be their quote-unquote peak.
I don't mean to call into question our head Ego Chall correspondent's legitimacy or anything, but they lost to New York in these qualifiers. They lost two S&Ds, and they've won since then. Have won four straight searches. There's no way that four straight S&D wins is a record. Because so they beat Miami in search, and then February 25th they lost the 5-game series to New York. That was the series that we talked about because that was the one they lost game 2 and game 5, which is a very rare thing for FaZe in general. Since then, they have literally swept every single opponent. So maybe it's a streak in terms of total map wins consecutively because now they've won. I mean, obviously, I'm including the Boston win that they had later in this weekend, but now they've won 12 maps in a row. I don't know what the actual streak is for most wins, most map wins in a row, because that's a pretty weird record. You could win a ton of matches, but you lose a control or something, and that could be the end of your streak. So I could see it being a just a total map win record or a win streak, because 12 is pretty incredible. But I'm almost positive that some team has won at least 5 or 6 searches in a row. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if FaZe has done that, multiple times. But yeah, I was just looking that up because I was confused like you because I remember talking about this, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was a map win streak. But still, it crazy impressive that Atlanta they had.
Do you have the S&D record in front of you then?
I do not. Oh, they're from the qualifiers.
Yeah.
So I think they're
those 2 losses.
Yeah. So what they played 7 qualifiers this round.
It should be 8 or it should be 6 at most because they probably have one this week.
So they're 4-2. No, wait.
Okay.
Wait. Let me look at this.
I'm scrolling too.
Because I'm looking at Breaking Point, but that might not have every single thing that we need for this. But they have certainly won the last 4 because they've swept.
They won 3-1 against Miami and they won the S&D, so 1-0. Doesn't really mess there. They lost to New York too, so 1-2. They won an S&D against Rocker, so 2-2. Won an S&D against Toronto, 3-2.
Oh, 5-2, yeah. Because there were two
LA
S&Ds in the New
4.
York series.
Yep, so 5-2.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're probably the best S&D team right now, along with New York, because New York has looked really, really strong this entire stretch. But yeah, 12 wins in a row, and we'll get to their Boston win later in the episode. Next match was Carolina versus LAG. Not a barn burner by any means. This does have, I think, quite a bit of implications for just in terms of like season standings, because both of these teams are desperately trying to not be in the bottom four come champs time, and the more you keep losing, the worse it seems to get for both these teams. But Carolina able to win. Our favorite thing to talk about, Carolina loses the search in this series, but they win all of the respawns, pretty definitively. Your thoughts now that LAG slips to 0-4 and Carolina still just winning despite not winning search?
Yeah, I mean, it's just another one that seems like what we go back to. Some series, Carolina wins the respawns, loses the search, and then vice versa happens where they'll lose a series but only win the search. Still not sure what to make of them. I think we can kind of segue into LAG's next map after this too. But I'm not really sure what's going on with LAG. It feels like that's the theme for these guys at this point. Is just they had some signs of early life early on in the season, but really since then it's been downhill, and it's just a question of what they're gonna do next. But Carolina, given the like clump at the bottom of the standings heading into this major, this was almost a must-win for Carolina if they want to start in the winners bracket. So they took care of business in that regard. I just thought it was funny too. Gwyn had a tweet after the match. I'm not sure if he deleted it, but a breaking point screenshot. It just said, "GG's LAG 131. Can someone effing chow at all? All credit corners, no gunny. Holy shit! All those guys suck." And I thought that was a pretty good tweet, especially from a rookie. Maybe Clay's rubbing off on him a little too much in that regard, but that can only be a better thing for the league, especially if Gwyn's able to back it up with the numbers he's been posting on what seems like a consistent basis so far in his rookie year. So that was a good one. But yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on for LAG right now, and it obviously doesn't get much better for the following match.
Yeah, they got swept by New York in the first match of Saturday. Pretty big losses too. One of those weird hard points where the team didn't get to 250, but it wasn't close either.
It was the map could have ended too if New York just got off the hill. It could have ended at like 150 to 140. I might be exaggerating on the number. It was one of those where like I was watching it and I was like, I can't believe New York is staying on the hill. Yeah. And it was almost like they just wanted to end it in 250, but there was legitimately like a point where it was on the bomb site by B-Bomb on Invasion where the tank is and Ice Cream and all that. And like they got like 3 or 4 down, and I think it was Skies who was in the hill. He literally could have just jumped out and the game ended, but he just stayed in it, and then they got another wave of kills and he could have hopped out then to end it, and he didn't. And it blew my mind. It was like they just they wanted it to end it and score. They didn't want to let it go to time, which I don't think there's like a tiebreaker or anything like that. And obviously the position New York is in, it wouldn't really matter. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so they won 247 to 143 on Invasion. Then they won 6-1 on Karachi Search, 3-1 Invasion Control. I mean, obviously congratulations to New York. They're an incredible team and all of that, but this is not unexpected for them. For LAG, this, not necessarily that they're one of the worst teams in the league. I think that was kind of expected as well. But they've now lost 6 straight matches. They had a decently strong or maybe surprisingly good qualifiers for Major 1. They won 2 matches at Major 1, which is better than most people probably gave them credit for. They lost 3-2 to Minnesota to finish their major, which they were actually up 2-1 in that series and ended up losing Game 4 and Game 5 to get bounced from the major. But since then, they lost 3-1 to Vegas, 3-1 to OpTic, 3-0 to Seattle, which is not a good loss. They lost 3-1 to Carolina, like we just said, and they lost 3-0 to New York. Okay, I'll give them, a pass on New York. I'll give them a pass on OpTic. Those teams are both 6-0. They are championship contenders. I don't expect LAG at all to beat those teams. But to lose to Carolina, Seattle, and Vegas, they won 2 of those maps. 2 maps total in those 3 series against teams that Carolina's 2-4, Seattle 1-4, Vegas 3-2. Which, Vegas is, kind of, they're surging, but they're still Vegas at the end of the day. And that makes 6 straight losses for LAG. Is it time for a roster change for LAG? They do have a substitute, so there is some kind of valve there to maybe relieve some pressure that they don't have to go out and sign a new player. But it feels like this roster is done. It feels cooked at this point, and there needs to be some kind of change, even if it's just kind of a temporary thing, and then you move on to maybe a larger scale roster change later down, maybe between the majors or between Major 2 and the qualifiers. What do you think? What do you think is the right option for LAG?
I think with 1 week here before the major, I don't think they make a change like this week. That would, on one hand, it's kind of like, well, we don't have anything to lose because we're winless at this point, so it couldn't really hurt. But with chemistry and factoring all that in, I don't think that's happening. The bigger thing for me is it feels like at this point, we might be looking at a blow it up bowl situation. And I don't know if a one-person change really changes much for LAG. And the problem with that is obviously with the organizational stuff, all the behind the scenes stuff we heard reported on last year with LAG and the Guard Esports, whatever the Kroenke family ownership situation is, all that.
Yeah.
We don't really know if the organization is going to be willing to spend on making multiple roster moves that would be necessary to right the ship here.
Yeah.
So not sure if a one-person change gets the job done. It very well could, obviously, but we'll have to see. But yeah, I would be surprised if they did anything drastic here. I'd be surprised if they made more than a one-person change, period.
Yeah.
Even though I think that's what they should do at this point. But I would be surprised if they made a change before Major 2. I do think after Major 2, especially if they come in like a top 12 situation in last place, that they don't win it all, it almost feels necessary that they would at least bring their sub in for a one-person change, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, so technically they're tied for 9th in the CDL, but they have the worst series win percentage in the league and the worst map win percentage in the league. Their major performance where they won 2 matches, that has essentially carried them out of 12th place because they're only 10 points ahead of Boston, who is in last place in the league at this point. So, who knows with Boston, they're still kind of getting to work together with this new roster. Maybe they're going to be able to climb out of 12th place. They just lost to Carolina, who's in 11th. So, they are not LAG is at least the 11th, or at best, I guess, the 11th team in this league right now. Maybe Boston could be above them. We'll have to see them play each other to kind of get an idea. But I think you got to make a change. There has to be something, whether you do it, they're not going to do it this week, almost assuredly, because they only have 1 match and it's against FaZe. So, I mean, they're likely going to, lose. And we talked about it with Miami. You don't do that. You don't make your roster change right before you play one of the best teams in the entire league. But there has to be a change within the next few weeks. If it's after the major, it's after the major. But there can't be just this level of mediocrity and it just be accepted. Because that just shows that you're not serious about any of this. And, not that we thought LAG was super serious about winning a championship when they put out this roster, but this is, 6 straight losses is bad. And, you're pretty much going an entire qualifier stretch without a single win, without even forcing a game 5. That's bad. So they have to make a change at some point, and I hope that they do. Moving on, though, we had 2 more matches on Saturday. We had Minnesota versus Seattle. Seattle is not a great team, but I was pretty skeptical just to see how this would work out because Minnesota hadn't won a match heading into this. Seattle had won one, but only had beaten LAG, who we just said might be the worst team in the league. This felt like a kind of a must win for Minnesota because they did have an easier schedule these last 2 weeks after having a pretty rough go of things in the first 3 weeks of the qualifiers. But Minnesota ends up winning this 3-1, a very much needed victory. Pretty interesting series for Seattle to come out and win a hard point game 1 and then lose the search, and then Minnesota kind of ratcheted up and played like the team, more resembling what we saw in Major 1. They won the search, they won the Control 3-0, and then they won sub-base hardpoint by nearly 80 points. So what did you take away from this? Because neither of these two teams have looked good at all since the Major, which at the Major they looked pretty good, but since then they haven't. What did you think of Minnesota's 3-1 win here?
Yeah, you kind of took the meat of what I was going to say, but just if you told me it was going to be a 3-1 win for Minnesota, I'd been like, oh yeah, Seattle takes the search, Minnesota wins the respawns, and wham bam, that's done and over with, right? But obviously that's not what happened here, and we had talked in the prediction segment of the last episode. I really didn't know which team to take, and the map 1 comes down to the wire with Seattle winning the hard point. I'm thinking in the back of my head, damn, I really should have took Seattle because Seattle's going to take this search, go up 2-0, and then, there's no shot they get reverse swept, right? But Minnesota is able to take the search, which this is something I didn't remember to check before we went live today, but I'm pretty sure they said on broadcast that Seattle was 4-0 on invasion search this season heading into this map. So not only is Seattle, obviously with the Illy roster situation, it's a different roster, but Seattle as a team has been pretty strong at search with or without Illy for the question. But, even without Illy where they've struggled, search has still been at least like their best mode of the 3, even if it's still not great. If you tell me they're undefeated on that map, obviously heading into that different circumstances without Illy, but that's still one I'm like, they're probably going to take it just based on what we've seen, but wasn't the case in this one. Minnesota takes that, use that momentum for a strong 3-0 win in the Control, and they take the next hard point after that to close things out.
Yeah, so now Seattle is 2-3 in search with Brezzy in the lineup. Pretty small sample size. I'm trying to look to see what their overall was with Illy. So they were
better than 2-3. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, definitely better than that. I think that they were. Hold on, 5, 6, 7. I think they were 11-4 in search.
That sounds about right.
So that goes from being, one of the best search teams in the league to average or below average. And they haven't gotten any like discernibly better in hardpoint and Control to kind of make up for that. So
exactly, yeah.
that's why they sit now with a 1-4 record, I believe it is, in the CDL. And that's not great. I don't know what the solution is because, the Illy situation is unique. That I've never seen anything like that in competitive COD. So it's kind of hard to say, just put Illy back into the lineup. I have no idea what's going on there, but they are obviously a worse team without him. Maybe with him, they would have beaten Minnesota. But at this point, I wouldn't be surprised to see more roster changes for this team, at least, maybe not like after this major, but I think that we need to at least keep an eye on it at this point, especially if they end up in the losers bracket and then get bounced in the first round at the major. That feels like more of a, okay, like there's going to be something happening here. But a big win for Minnesota, a pretty bad loss for Seattle. And then we move on to Atlanta versus Boston, final match of Saturday. Not a ton of surprises here. Wasn't close. Atlanta had a pretty easy, smooth weekend, all things considered. I said it before, but they've now won 12 straight maps since losing that 3-2 series to New York, which is the only loss that they've had of this qualifier stretch. Boston, they dropped to 2-4 on the in the qualifiers. Now that you've seen like a few series with ASIM in the lineup, anything jump out to you? Do you think Boston looks better, worse, more of the same after Capsule benching or release? Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, I would have to go back and look at each of the matches and compare it, but obviously they were like, did they go 2-5 in the Major One qualifiers? I feel like they did.
That sounds yeah,
Um,
they did because they're 4-10 total, so they won two series in Major One qualifiers.
yeah, so I mean, it's a pretty neutral change, like in terms of affecting the win loss, right? You know, I feel like there have been some moments from ASIM where he's shown what he's capable of. I can especially remember just again, this goes back to the year long conversation we've had of the meta and all that stuff with the MCW, where in the past we probably think of ASIM as the route guy with an SMG doing the dirty work, getting the hill, taking the big routes and the long flanks, all that good stuff. But I feel like there's been moments where I've seen him like streak a little bit with an AR. And obviously that might not be something you would expect in the past when thinking about ASIM as a player, but because of what just how good that gun is in MW3 and the current meta, it's something that you kind of have to have in some circumstances, and he's shown he's able to put in some work with an AR there, where in the past you might not have expected that from him necessarily. So that's been
Mm-hmm.
good to see. Um, but I just feel like the Boston as a whole, it's really the story has been, we've definitely noted in the past when Snoopy pops off, that seems to be like their ticket to success. And if everyone else around him isn't popping off, then things aren't going well for the team, even though, at the major, I remember Slasher had the highest KD at the Boston major, even though it was only one series, but he had like a 1.45 or something like that. And, that's his only series on land this year. And we know how much Slasher likes playing on land. So, um, yeah, I still feel like I got to see more from Boston before I can really judge them, but I don't have any major takeaways from the roster as a whole right now.
Yeah, they also haven't really had a ton of competition necessarily. So like, they've lost all of the series that they played against good teams since ASIM's come in the lineup. They lost 3-0 to New York and FaZe. They lost 3-2 to OpTic, obviously at the first match of this weekend. And then they lost 3-0 to Vegas, which seems kind of like, I don't know if that says more about Vegas or if it says more about Boston. And then they've beaten Minnesota 3-2, and they beat Carolina 3-1. That was the first match of the qualifiers. So it's kind of weird. They have a worse map win loss percentage in this qualifier stretch than they did in Major One. Despite if they lose this coming qualifying match, they would have the exact same record, like you mentioned, 2-5 in the qualifiers. Again, they played FaZe, they played New York, they played OpTic. Those are
Yeah.
3 of the 4 best teams. That's a pretty tough schedule, but they didn't really compete against 2 of them very much. So maybe that says something.
And end of the day, I mean, going back to what we were talking about, although the streak for S&D wasn't technically correct, just the map win streak for FaZe. FaZe is hot right now, no matter which way you look at it. So, um, they went 12-0 in S&D rounds this week with 2 6-0s, 2 3-0 sweeps, and they have the potential for the longest map win streak. So Easy Mac, who is a former analyst for Atlanta FaZe, says with FaZe playing LAG, if they win the Hardpoint and S&D this week, they set the record for longest map win streak. That's pretty impressive. Regardless of who you're playing against, these are still pros at the end of the day. Pro teams, like, you say strength of schedule and all that stuff. Like, they're playing who's put in front of them, and if they're beating them in dominant fashion consecutively like that, that's still noteworthy. So, would kind of be an LAG thing if LAG just came out of nowhere and prevented Atlanta from setting history there. But we'll have to wait till this week to see, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, like you said, it's kind of a strength of schedule thing. Like but it's still important, especially because they beat Toronto in this streak as well. So, Toronto is part of is 3 maps in this now 12 map win streak. Granted, some of the other teams not performing so hot, but to sweep the Ultra is no small thing.
I will say too, Breaking Point literally just tweeted this 1 minute ago. A CDL duo card for Simp and Abizi. According to Breaking Point, Simp and Abizi are now the longest standing duo in terms of how long they've teamed together at 1,820 days, surpassing Scump and Crim6, which is funny in itself, at 1,760 days. So technically they would have surpassed them, last month, but regardless, it's still we've talked about them as a duo, and all the what ifs about what would happen if Abizi or Simp ever left and one of them went out on their own and all that stuff. But it's pretty remarkable to think about how much success they've had together, and now it's official that nobody else has been a 1-2 punch together as long as they have, and that if they stick together for the rest of their careers, which very well could be a possibility, that's a record that won't be broken probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that they're the best duo in COD history, like at least in my opinion. I know Scump and Crim6. I don't like it. That doesn't pop off to me as a duo necessarily, even though they were teammates.
You think of Scump and Formal.
Yeah, exactly. And even for Crim6, like I wouldn't even say any of his OpTic teammates that I'm necessarily thinking. I'm thinking more like Aches, even though I would probably say Aches and TP. So
that's what I would say.
So it's a weird thing. Maybe that says more about Crim because he's not the most popular guy at the end of his stretch with players.
Actually, I'm pretty sure the duo would be Crim and Clay, because you got to think with the Empire winning.
Yeah, but even then, I don't think about that. But they were.
I know. I'm just trying to think of something.
But it would probably be because you have Complexity, you have the Empire, you have even New York. That one season that Clay got benched. So
yeah.
But like each of those ended in a sour taste for Clay, literally every single one of those times. So I don't know what to say about that. But yeah, like I think of Abizi and I think of Simp together. Obviously they're the Tiny Terrors, so they have kind of that connection as kind of a named duo, but I don't see anybody, like there aren't that many teams that have won, or many players that have won a world championship, and they've won 2 together. So like that is something pretty incredible. I'm trying to think if there's even been a pair of teammates other than, I was gonna say Clay and Crim, but they didn't win 2 together. They just won the one with the Empire. So I think they're the only team, or 2 teammates that have won a pair of championships, and that kind of puts them like at the very top, right? Because even Scump and Formal, they only won 1 each, and
I mean, obviously it's splitting hairs, but Arcides would have 1 with Simp and Abizi, or would have 2 with Simp and Abizi as well.
Interesting. Okay, I'll allow it. Like we'll just, like RC is kind of like half in there as well, They could just be a trio and Selim gets left out in the dirt like that. But yeah, just I mean they're incredible. I've said before I think Simp is the best Call of Duty player of all time. Like, and I think regardless of when he was born and like what kind of game he started with, like if he came up like in MW2 and MW3, I think he would still be considered like the best or one of the best ever. So
He's playing MW2 last year and MW3 this year. What do you mean?
yeah, I hate Activision so much. But Atlanta now on a 12 map win streak. It's going to be something to watch. Like you said, they have to win 2 maps against LAG, the first 2 maps, excuse me, this coming week, and then they will own the. I think they already own it, but I think they'll re-own the map win streak in CDL history. Sunday, March 10th, we had the final 3 matches of the week. First, LAT versus Vegas. I mean, this is just so Vegas, right? To have these expectations to allow you to pick them, and then they're like, yeah, we don't need to show up this week. They lose 3-1 to LAT. Just a I don't know. Like these two teams are really weird in general. LAT did lose the hard point, so at least they're staying consistent in that way. But then they won Search. They won a 3-2 on Control, and then they won a pretty decisive hard point to finish this series. Any takeaways from this series? Because I don't think I know anything about either of these teams, despite being 5-6 matches into these qualifiers. Their new rosters relative to the rest of the league, but it feels like they're pretty inconsistent, and I don't know where to like kind of power rank any of these teams at this point.
Yeah, that's what I was really disappointed by Vegas. Kind of like you said, it's let them. I let them get my hopes up of maybe this is the turnaround that the Paris/Vegas franchise has been looking for, and they have a very beatable opponent in LAT, and I'm thinking this is should be a win for them, but they just don't get it done, and I'm in the same boat as you. Both these teams are 3-2. With the way the lower half of the standings is shaking out in the qualifiers, both of them are probably 3 wins is probably enough to get them in the winners bracket.
Yeah, they are.
But in saying that, due to how the standings are, and unless there's some wild scenario where, some stuff happens that elevates them to like a 4 or 5 seed, they are most likely playing either FaZe, OpTic, Toronto, or New York in the first round at the major, right? Even if they're in the winners bracket.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to have a very tough opponent on paper, theoretically, for a first round, even though they're starting in the winners bracket. And then we'll really get a taste of what this squad is capable of, because they'll most likely lose if they play one of those quote-unquote top 4 teams, and then they'll have a losers bracket match, and then we'll have to see how they stack up there against that other, losers bracket team. So not really sure what to make of either squad right now, but Attach is frying. That's what I kind of noted earlier when I was talking about Shotzzy having 103 in the series against Boston. Heading into this series heading into the map 4 of this match against LAT, Attach only needed 32 kills to tie Metals' mark of 104 this season, and that was through 3 maps with his team being down 2-1. He ends up with 98, which is 6 away from the mark, but that's with his team losing 3 maps.
Yeah.
So one of those maps turns around, he goes into an S&D needing 6 kills, he drops 8 or 10, like he's able to set that easily. And if they win a hard point, he probably has more kills in that second hard point too if they win that one. So he's been playing well, and we've talked about that. I feel like over the last couple episodes, it seems like with this new team dynamic, since Geo comes in, he's kind of weird to think of Attach as a quote unquote old man or a main AR, but it feels like that's the situation he's in now, right? He's got a couple of rookies around him, and Nero is in like his third year, and he would quote unquote be the next closest veteran on the squad. So it's really just attaching the boys, and he's been playing well. It's getting the other guys around him on the same page with him, and then Vegas could maybe turn things around. But definitely a disappointing loss for them in my eyes, at least here. But obviously, a situation where still not sure what to make of LAT, but they get a win that seemingly puts them in a position to be in winners bracket. So that's better than where we were looking at last time.
To make people feel old, Attach won his world championship 9 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's been a while. And granted, he was like, I think the youngest COD world champion at that point. But yeah, he's been around literally a long time at this point. But yeah, I don't know where to really put Vegas or LAT at this point. So, like you said, they're almost certainly going to play a really tough first round opponent, both of them. They both clinched winners bracket spots. So 6 teams, according to COD Gamepedia, have winners bracket spots at Major 2, New York, OpTic, Atlanta, Toronto, Vegas, and LAT. That's like 2 polar bears in Texas right there. Like those are teams that
are already locked in.
Yeah.
Oh,
because
wow.
I think they have tiebreakers because right now those 6 teams are the only teams that have reached 3 wins. And then right now Carolina and Boston would be the final 2 teams in the winners bracket, and Seattle, Minnesota, Miami, LAG, those would be the losers bracket teams. Granted, some of these teams have 2 matches to play. Like Seattle, they could get to 3 wins theoretically, despite having a really bad start to the qualifiers. But they're Vegas and LAT, like you said, are likely going to play. I mean, if all things hold, Vegas would play Toronto round 1, and LAT would play FaZe round 1. Both of those teams beat both of the LAT and Vegas. Vegas, they lost to Toronto 3-1 in these qualifiers. LAT lost 3-0 to FaZe. So I don't really have a lot of faith, but Vegas has not been a ton of winners bracket, in the major in like the entire CDL's history. So I think that's just a win in general. But yeah, it's probably not going to go well for them in Miami, but we'll see. Speaking of Miami, though, they're definitely not doing real well this set of qualifiers. They fall to 1-5, but they still win this somehow.
Yeah.
Or they not fall, but they improve to 1-5. They finally won a Rio map, which I thought was interesting because I think they had lost every single time that they played on Rio until this point, and then they won the opening hard point on Rio. They win a search, they lose control, so Carolina, staying true to form, they lose the search, and then a pretty dominant sub-base hard point win for Miami. What does it say about, I don't know what it says about Miami, but what does it say about Carolina that this team just they can't get it together?
I'm in a similar boat to the last match, right? This is a disappointing loss for Carolina. It's one you kind of think, probably to a lesser extent than that last match. Got to give LAT some credit after the roster change. Yeah. Obviously, they were 2-2 heading into that match. In this scenario, though, Carolina is going up against a winless team that hasn't won since making a roster change. You kind of just expect them, with somebody like Clay being the veteran leader it is, to come out and want to set the tone early and just take care of business, and seemingly isn't what happened here, obviously. So, and this is an uncharacteristic series in the sense of that kind of pattern we were talking about. Yeah, Carolina wins one map, but I can't think of very many maps recently or series for them recently where the one map they win is the control. It's usually, they win the respawns, lose the search, and then they win the series, or they lose the series but win the search and lose all the respawns. So this was a little bit weird in that sense, but regardless, just a disappointing performance out of Carolina. It's one you expect them to win, probably more than I was expecting Vegas to win that other one against LAT. So not really sure what to make of that. And Carolina has another question mark match this week where they have a chance to beat a team that you might think they have a shot to beat, but after this performance, I don't really know if I think they're going to take them down.
Yeah, man, these two teams are not good at all. I don't know what it says about LAG either, that LAG lost to Carolina and then Carolina lost to Miami, because I thought Miami might be the worst team in the league at one point. Yeah, it's bad. Like these like bottom 4 or 5 teams, they are really, really in trouble. And it feels like we're gonna get to the point, in like a month or two, and we're gonna be like, yeah, that team has like absolutely no shot at making champs, and it's gonna be like we're gonna have quite a few matches to go still. I don't know. It's bad. Carolina, they've won 2 series in the qualifiers. I don't know. Like they don't have a ton of talent necessarily. I think Gwen looks great, but other than that, there hasn't been a lot to be hopeful for the Ravens.
TJ's had his moments too, and he's been playing pretty
Yeah.
well. So not total doom and gloom, but yeah.
Yeah, it just hasn't been a very good stretch or good season at all for Carolina, and maybe it'll improve with more time, but it's a pretty shocking loss there to the Heretics. Final match of the weekend, a match definitely worth waiting for. OpTic versus Toronto. Toronto coming in off of that 3-0 loss to FaZe last week. And OpTic ends up beating the Ultra 3-2. This was a really, even if you just look at like the map scores, it's not close. Like the closest map score would have been the opening hardpoint, 250 to 208 in favor of the Ultra, and then we get sweeps in Search and Control by OpTic, 6-0 on Karachi Search, 3-0 on Invasion Control, and then a nearly 100-point hardpoint win for Toronto, and then a 6-1 Terminal Search win for OpTic. OpTic winning 2 searches in a series is notable, and Toronto losing 2 searches in a series is notable.
Yep.
What is more surprising to you there?
Based on the way Toronto played at Major 1, I think you got to go with Toronto. But, it's their. I bet if we went back in history and actually took the time to look at the amount of series where OpTic has won 2 searches and the Neslo, as a lot of people in the community like to refer to it, OpTic historically have been better at the respawns and have much more series where they win 3-1 because they win 2-3 respawns and lose the search. So that was definitely notable, but this goes back to what I said at the very beginning of the show. With OpTic winning the 2 searches here, not only winning the 2 searches, but winning them 12-1 round count, Toronto literally only winning 1 round in the searches. This comes after OpTic lost the map of Search to Boston and went round 11 with Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So that just has me really confused about where Toronto stands right now in terms of their Search. And obviously it's 2 straight losses for them, but it's not like 2 straight losses to LAG or Carolina or bottom teams. It's 2 straight losses to 2 really good teams. So that's not the concern, but the concern of how competitive these searches were against OpTic, who you don't necessarily think of as the most competitive search team, is a little concerning to me. The other thing that is more interesting too is that in that loss to Atlanta, where Atlanta beat Toronto, that went to a round 11 in the search. So technically, Toronto won, not even technically, it's just factual. Toronto won more rounds of search against Atlanta than OpTic in 1 map against Atlanta than 2 maps against OpTic, which is just weird to think about. So I'm not really sure what's going on. My gut has me thinking like Toronto just might be in this situation with the online stuff, because obviously they're playing from Toronto and OpTic would be playing from Texas, so it might be like some ping stuff going on, but obviously I don't want to make excuses or anything like that. I just, it's something that I feel like needs to be said, whether it's true or not and having any effect or not. But yeah, I mean, we had this in the major one qualifiers with Toronto losing to Boston before the holiday break, or was it right after the holiday break? I
I
don't remember. But
think it
they
was
lost to
right before.
Boston. Yeah, we were kind of like, what the heck's going on? And then obviously Toronto goes on their nasty run at the major on land. It's like, oh, doesn't matter. They're gross. So um could obviously be all smoke and mirrors here, and Toronto just comes out and fries at the land, but it's definitely got my attention in terms of what's going on with Toronto.
Yeah, the search is a little concerning. Like, I think that's the thing that jumps out the most. So in these qualifiers, Toronto is 4-4 in search, and on the season, they are 8, 9, 13, and 7, I think. So they were what 9-3 heading into the qualifiers in search, and now they've been 500, and lately it's been even worse. They've lost 4 of their last 5 search maps in these qualifiers. Granted, there is the potential caveat of it being online, things kind of being inconsistent in general, but they were 6-0'd by the Vegas Legion in search. Then they had that round 11 loss to Atlanta. And then, like you said, they lost 12-1 to OpTic across these these two maps in this series. So what's that? 18, not a good, like they are, really getting smoked in these searches as well. Um, I don't know, like it's just one of those things that these teams do where they're championship contenders, obviously, but then they like have a kind of a dip in performance right before they go to the major, and then they make us start to question, like, oh, I don't know about this, and this is how we end up picking FaZe literally almost every single match in CDL history, because FaZe is super consistent in the qualifiers, and FaZe looks just as good in the qualifiers as they do on land. So you're like, oh, okay, maybe FaZe is the team to beat. But like Toronto absolutely obliterated FaZe like when they needed to at the major. Like they beat them twice and in an extended series. So I feel like Ultra is just kind of sandbagging a little bit. Like I can't pick against them because it feels stupid to do that. But now they're making me question whether this is kind of a mirage in terms of their S&D. But who knows? This is just a very weird thing. But that's not to take away from what OpTic did, obviously,
Yeah.
because to win 2 searches in a series this dominant of wins, I mean, that can't be understated, especially against a team that has the talent that Toronto does, and just won the first major. OpTic now 6-0 in these qualifiers. I think they were the first team to go undefeated last season in the qualifiers, if I'm not remembering correctly, because I'm pretty sure that was also the major that they ended up like losing to Florida in the first round or something like that. So OpTic is a weird being in itself, but definitely a big win. And let's shift this conversation over to Shotzzy specifically, because this is something that we talked about in the first part of this episode with their first win of the weekend. And this was an Aches thing, right, about whether he is a superstar or not.
So I think it's something that was started towards the end of last year or last
Yeah.
season, has kind of carried over into this just because Shotzzy has been playing so well recently. First and foremost, everyone who's listened to this show and anybody who knows what I think about Call of Duty in general knows how much I like Patty P and how much I respect him as a competitor, and just a mind in Call of Duty in general. So I was saying it before we went live. I think this whole situation really just comes down to, semantics and dictionary definitions of what individuals think the term superstar means, and that can be debated over and over again. One thing I mean, the guy whose name is right behind me there, Derek Jeter, my undisputed favorite player growing up in baseball. There's a lot of people who think statistics say he isn't one of the greatest shortstops of all time, even though he's in the Hall of Fame and all that stuff. And, people are able to have that argument. And same thing I said to you about Aaron Rodgers. One of my hot takes in sports is that Aaron Rodgers is overrated, and that again comes back to how highly some people rate him and how highly I would rate him personally. It all comes down to what different people look to and criteria and all that stuff. So, end of the day, it's really it is what it is. But there are some valid points, I feel like, on both sides of the fence in this case, where it seems like some people are saying like you can't have a ton of superstars in the CDL because of just there's only 48 pros. So if you're willing to say 10 plus people are superstars, that kind of takes away from what the term superstar means and how if you're just handing out like Oprah saying you're a superstar, that sort of thing, like what does that really mean at the end of the day? But at the same time, splitting hairs over who's a superstar and who isn't is kind of, it just is what it is. So, I don't think it needs to be anything too deep like that. Shotzzy's obviously an incredible talent, a super strong player, whether you consider him a star or a superstar. And what can't be disputed right now, in my eyes, is the way Shotzzy is playing. He's just playing lights out lately. Literally 1.7 in a series against Boston. You can make the argument that he might not put up those numbers against the best teams, yada yada, but he can only play who's put in front of him, and he's playing lights out Call of Duty lately over the last 2 weeks in particular, and that can't be disputed.
Yeah, I like you. I like Aches. I think that he's a really smart guy. He's really funny, and he's one of the. I mean, he's one of the greatest Call of Duty players of all time. I don't know where he ranks anymore because things have gotten so weird, and he hasn't been like at the top in a long time. But I also think like he's just like a shit stirrer at the end of the day. Like this is how he's always been too. This was before he even retired. He likes to stir the pot, and he likes to be kind of like a Stephen A. Smith of Call of Duty, where he's just throwing out takes. He's got a hot take he wants to get off. And then,
I mean, Stephen A. Smith is allegedly only averaging 1 point in college basketball, whereas Aches at least has the credentials to kind of give him a little bit of wiggle room in terms of knowing what he's talking about as a two-time world champ.
But Aches has a hot take, and the hot take is that Shotzzy's not a superstar. I don't think it's nearly as hot as it probably, like right now, it's not as hot of a take as it would have been like 3-4 years ago, because that would have been a ludicrous thing to say, especially after he won MVP in 2020 was the first season of the CDL. So like obviously if you win the MVP, you at least for that year or that time, you're a superstar. But I also just think like he's playing with a lot more talented, more kill heavy players now than he was back then. Obviously it was also a 5-man team when he won his MVP, so that also changes things. But Clayster and Crimsix were nearing the end of their careers, were not as slay heavy as they were, when they were in their primes. I would never say that Illy is like, of the most incredible slayer. That's not really his like strong suit. Like he can drop some big kill games, but Search has obviously been like his strongest part of his game, like his entire career. And then Hook, Hook at one point would also drop, big kill numbers, but like I feel like Shotzzy was just set up to have these incredible numbers that people were like, holy crap, what's going on here? And he's kind of just taken a back seat, not because like he's worse off or he's not as talented as he was then. I just think you have Pred, you have Dashy, you have Kenny. Those guys have to get kills. Like that's kind of their thing. Kenny less so, but Pred and Dashy can drop 30, 40 kills on a map if their team needs it. So for me, I don't know, like the superstar thing, I never really thought about it in terms of kind of how many people can be, labeled a superstar and before it gets diluted and then it starts losing its meaning. Because I obviously watch a lot of the NBA. That's the sport I follow the most. And there are a lot of people that are called superstars, but then you're like, is he a superstar? Is he just a star? Is he just like a starter? Like he's a good player? What kind of goes into that? But I think that's probably the strongest point is that there are only 48 players at a given time in the CDL. And if you make 12 of them a superstar, that's a quarter of the league. Does it make sense to call each of them a superstar? Probably not. But I also just think like part of what goes into being a superstar is how popular you are, how much impact you have on the game, on the league, on the popularity of the competition. And Shotzzy is undoubtedly one of the most popular players in the entire league. He might be now the most popular player in the league now that Scump is gone. I think actually he is undoubtedly the most popular player in the league at this point. So like,
I say Dashy, but obviously it's an OpTic thing. Yeah.
yeah, like it. I just think like it's a weird thing. Do you think like he is a superstar? Or would you lean toward Aikes's kind of, he's a good player. He could be a great player at times. I kind of want to get your definitive opinion, I guess, on this.
I don't think I can give a definitive answer one way or the other. I think you made the good point about popularity, and one thing I was watching a Tack Rab video before this, so shout out Tactical Rab. He brought up the example of Scump, right? And like, there is no point in Scump's career where you would say he's not a superstar. Even in a year like World War II, where OpTic didn't really have a ton of success, and I think is that the only year he didn't win a championship was the World War II year. I think that's the stat. I don't know off the top of my head.
No, they've gone years without winning, but I don't think that. I think that was the first year that they didn't win.
Maybe that's regardless. At no point in Scump's career are you saying he's not a superstar, even if he's having like his worst year, and that factors in the popularity aspect of it too. If LeBron, just for the sake of the example,
Yeah, that's what I was
LeBron, like next year in his age 41, 42 season,
40.
I don't even know what it would be. 40, sorry. Let's just say he drastically went off a cliff and is averaging 10 points a year. For him, that would be a drastic fall off. You would still consider him a superstar due to that popularity aspect of it. So that's definitely something. And the other side of this that isn't even being talked about really, I feel like maybe it is and I just don't know. But it's completely different to call somebody a superstar in basketball, which is a game that is played the same way no matter what, since like what the 3-point line was added in whatever year it's been added. That's like the most drastic change. Call of Duty is literally a different game every single year. So it is very possible for someone to be a superstar in one game and then to not be a superstar in the next. So that has to be taken into account. And I think, like you said, that was a good example. Even though it was his rookie year with Shotzzy, like you can't say he wasn't a superstar when he won MVP, because then that means nobody in the league is a superstar because he was the most valuable player in the league. So if he's not a superstar, nobody can be that year, right? So it's tough. And I think coming off of a year last year where OpTic, the Green Wall didn't have the success that the Green Wall so craves. You can maybe make the argument that OpTic or that he's not a superstar, but he's still at the end of the day, he's like that face. Him and Dashy are the faces of OpTic now in the place where Scump was before. So if you're saying like Scump could never not be a superstar because of that popularity and the the stats combined, then you almost have to, like, it's not to that point yet for Dashy and Shotzzy, but it could get there at some point where it's like they're superstars because they're the faces of the most popular team in the league. So it's tough. But I think the way I worded it was very intentional when we were talking about it originally. Is what cannot be debated is that he is playing like a superstar right now in these most recent games. And I know it's online series, and some of those series are against not great teams. But even this series against Toronto, he drops a 1.14 against the defending major champions. Again, I know it's online and on all that stuff, but that's a strong performance, and he's been playing very well lately. So if he keeps it up, I think it's unquestioned that he'll be in that superstar consideration for almost anybody, especially if who knows if OpTic wins Major 2. I think that kind of puts this whole thing to rest unless somehow OpTic win Major 2 and he drops like a 0.6, which I don't see happening, but who knows at this point.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, obviously just semantics, like you said. It's just kind of an opinion about, what goes into being a superstar and what, is what kind of disqualifies you. Because, Kenny, when he was a TK, like, it was obvious, like, he's a superstar. Like, he's literally doing so much. He has such a massive impact. But, like, statistically, when he was with LAT, it wasn't as dominant. But would you consider him a superstar still? And then you look at FaZe, would you say that they have 3 superstars, or is this a team full of superstars? Because Draza is obviously an incredible player. I mean, like, you can't even debate Simp and Celium. Like, I think you should be, like, deported if you think that those guys aren't superstars. And then there's a Beezy who was also an MVP candidate and is consistently one of the most impactful players in the CDL. So, like, is there a limit on how many superstars that you can have? Like, because in the NBA, at a certain point, like, if you have a starting lineup of all superstars, like, you don't at that point, because there's only one ball. You can't, like, even if guys, you score 130 points a game, which would be crazy, like, you're still not going to have guys that are all superstars. Maybe at some point, like, the KD Warriors, like, where you're like, this is kind of crazy that they have this many players. But even then, guys take smaller roles to kind of accommodate other players. And I think that's what Shotzzy is doing here. I mean, they brought in Pred and Kenny. Pred and Kenny are 2 of the best Call of Duty players in the world. There's no reason for Shotzzy to be like, no, I got to drop a 1.4 KD like every series. Like, this is, like, that makes him a bad teammate. And, like, that could disqualify him from being a superstar, is that he doesn't care about winning. But I don't believe that at all. Like, there are legitimate criticisms of OpTic and Shotzzy in general, just because, they haven't been able to get over the hump. They haven't been able to win a championship. Like, Shotzzy, since that 2020 season, hasn't been there. But at the same time, like, that was also a criticism of Scump his entire career. Scump was undoubtedly one of, if not the best Call of Duty player, like, almost every single year. And he didn't win a championship until IW, which was, like, closer to the end of his career than the beginning of it. So I don't know, like, the superstar thing, like, I think the LeBron thing is a really good thing, because I see so many similarities between LeBron and Scump. Like, obviously the King thing is kind of a complete tie-in, but LeBron has consistently been criticized for not winning enough. But the same thing could also be said about Scump. He only won 1 championship, whereas you look at some of these other guys, they have 2-3 championships under their belt now. But Scump is always considered one of the best Call of Duty players, and for good reason, because he was consistently incredibly talented. Even at the end of his career, he was like, holy crap, like, this guy can really play. And that's not the case for a lot of guys that get into, like, their late 20s and start to have families and, get engaged and all that stuff. He consistently was one of the best players. So for Shotzzy, I think he's a superstar just because, he's the face of the league, or one of the faces of the league, and he's consistently one of the better players in the league in terms, at least statistically. Like, right now, I think he's got the 12th highest KD, so he's, like, in the top 25% in terms of KD. In terms of Slayer rating, according to Breaking Point, he's 6th in the league. I will say Gwen is kind of, like, right there with him, and maybe that says a lot about Gwen as well. But yeah, I like, if you look at kind of who would be considered a superstar, I think Celium, easy. Scrap, easy. Simp, easy. Hydra. Is Skies a superstar? Because he's 5th in KD, and he obviously won a world championship last year. He was probably the best player on Florida for pretty much, like, their entire existence, until he left, obviously. Would you consider Attach a superstar? Because he hasn't had the success as some of these other guys, other than, obviously being a world champion earlier in his career. But, like, in terms of team success, he hasn't had a lot. but he was a first team All-Star, whatever, 2-3 years ago, despite Minnesota being pretty bad. Is Pred a superstar? Is Dashy? Is OpTic full of superstars? Again, that comes to like, can 100% of your team be a superstar? That I don't know, like that to me seems like a weird thing. But yeah, that's kind of where we leave it. I don't know if you had any lasting thoughts on this.
Nope. I think at the end of the day, it's all going to be up to each individual and person's interpretation of what a superstar is to them. And if it gets people talking about Call of Duty esports at the end of the day, it's a W in my book. So shout out Patty P for the entertainment for people and just the discussion in general.
Yeah. Doug Sensor Martin, definitively a superstar for sure. Our pick'em for so obviously we only have 1 week of qualifiers left for Major 2. This past week we were both undefeated going into Sunday. And then Sunday happened and we were not undefeated anymore. You got all 3 of them wrong on Sunday. I got the last 2 wrong. Vegas, Carolina, Toronto, they backstabbed you. Carolina and Toronto, they backstabbed me. So at least we can share in that. In total, you are 61-33 on the year in the pick'em. I'm 66-28, and Tremor, as always, is winless at 0-1. The schedule for the upcoming week, let's go through our predictions here. Seattle versus Vegas to start it off. We are starting with the pinnacle of Call of Duty action. This entire day, just like put it in. It's the best. So Seattle versus Vegas. I'm going to go with Vegas. Seattle just can't win most of these game modes, so I'm going to go with the Legion.
I really didn't want to go with Vegas after they let me down last week, but I can't pick Seattle right now, so I got to go with Vegas.
That's kind of how I feel with this next match. LAG versus LAT. We need to slow down a little bit here, though, because LAT has lost almost every single matchup against LAG, including earlier this season. I'm still going to go with LAT, but we're going to have an intervention if LAG wins this match.
Yep. That is what I was going to say. I'm going with LAT too, but historically, the Battle of LA has gone through LAG, so could be an interesting one in a very non-interesting day of Call of Duty on Friday.
I mean, it's interesting, if you like watching the muck, the people just kind of wading through mud. Saturday, March 16th, Carolina versus Vegas. I mean, I got to go with Vegas, but this is another one of those where neither of these teams are very impressive at all.
Yeah, that's where my head's at, too. After both of these teams lose to winnable opponents on last Sunday, I really don't know who to go with, but I'm going to go with Vegas. So naturally, I'm picking Vegas to go 2-0 this weekend, and surely that can't go wrong, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did pick I think they went 2-0 one of the weeks that I picked them, but they're... we can never predict anything 100%. Minnesota versus Miami, the next match. I mean, I'm going to go with Minnesota, but this is another one where literally none of these teams are they don't inspire confidence whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm going to go Minnesota too, but not another match I'm looking forward to. I'll tell you that much.
Toronto versus LAT. If their S&D stuff is actually to worry about, this would be the match that will kind of prove that, because it's LAT. LAT is not, granted S&D is not their weakest point, but they haven't been incredibly strong in search either. I'm going to go with the Ultra, but I'm a little concerned.
I'm not concerned. I'm going to go with Toronto, but yeah, if they did somehow lose this one, then we'll have a very different conversation next week. Sunday,
March 17th, just starting off with another banger, Atlanta versus LAG. I don't know. Maybe FaZe can pull it off. I'm going to go with Atlanta. I'm in the upset.
Yeah, I'll go out on a limb, too, and pick Atlanta here.
Seattle versus Boston. I mean, this is this might be one of the worst weeks in Call of Duty League history, in all honesty.
Yeah.
Somehow the CDL scheduled all of the teams that have won 1 or 2 wins or have won 1 or 2 matches in these qualifiers against each other. I'm going to go with I'll go with Seattle just to be different. I don't
Ooh.
think I'm right, but I just don't want to go like the entire way by picking the same thing. But
Yeah.
maybe that'll be different in the last match.
Yeah, I'll go with Boston here. But yeah, with this last match, I wasn't letting it go complete chalk the whole week. So you don't. If you want to go with Boston for this one, you can if you want.
It's fine. I got a little bit of lead, so I can be kind of
Oh, we're getting cocky now.
OpTic versus New York to finish out the week. So at least we have one match where it can be like, okay, that's something that I actually want to view. I
It only
want
takes 7 matches to get to a banger, but we got a banger.
There's a reason to turn on the CDL YouTube channel at some point this weekend, and it'll be the last match. OpTic versus New York, both teams undefeated in the qualifiers. The winner will be the number 1 seed at Major 1. I'm going to go with OpTic, but this is about as confident as I am with something like, LAG versus LAT. It's kind of like, it could go either way, but I'm very much looking forward to this match.
Yeah, I am too. I'm going to go with New York. I think no matter what, I would be disappointed if this is a 3-0 for either team. I think this should be a very hard-fought series, and I think it will set up nicely. I think next week's episode, which will obviously recap these matches we just predicted, and then preview the major the following week, I think we're going to fly through those first 7 matches. We'll get to this one and hopefully have a lot to talk about, and then that'll set us up nicely for the bracket preview of Major 2.
Yep. That does it for the pick'em. Let me bring up the standings real quick. I don't think that the CDO actually tweeted out the actual qualifier standings, but they just tweeted out the full season. So the qualifier standings right now, like I briefly mentioned earlier in the episode. So New York and OpTic both at 6-0. They're tied for first. Atlanta is in third at 5-1. Toronto in fourth at 4-2, and then Vegas and LAT are currently tied for fifth at 3-2. Then you have Carolina and Boston tied for seventh at 2-4. Seattle at ninth at 1-4, and then Minnesota and Miami tied for 10th at 1-5, and LAG down there winless 0-5. They have a 3-15 map win-loss right now. Not great. Definitely starting in the losers bracket for this. Well, I guess not, technically, but I think they're going to start in the losers bracket. So yeah, that does it for the actual qualifier standings. I believe I brought it up yet. I'm going to bring it up on the screen real quick. But it is, if I can get my stuff to work, Jesus. But Toronto, they are at the top of the CDL standings. Always kind of interesting to see what, their lead is not very much at all now. Let me bring it up real quick on the screen. So Toronto, like I said, 200 points, first place. Atlanta only 5 points back now from Toronto. And Atlanta phase is inevitable. They have finished first in every regular season standings in CDL history. It feels like they're destined to do it again. But majors, they definitely have a big impact on the points. So Atlanta's in second. OpTic is 35 points behind Atlanta in third. New York is 40 points behind OpTic in fourth. And then there's a drop. Minnesota, 85 points in fifth. Then Seattle in sixth. Miami in seventh. Vegas in eighth. So that would be your champs right now. Miami and Vegas and Seattle making it a champs. And Minnesota, despite only winning one qualifier match so far. And then Vegas and LAG both tied for ninth. Carolina in 11th. And then Boston in 12th. Boston in 12th seems like a really big surprise this season. But, they have kind of looked a little bit better, I think, maybe. Who knows, in these qualifiers. And they do have a chance to get another win this weekend. That does it for the standings. I saw that you put in the notes that JCap had quote tweeted that it's been 4 years since the CDL moved away from the the LAN home series and the moved online because of COVID. This was so my dad's birthday is actually today, and I was home for all of this shit 4 years ago because it was my spring break. I decided to go home to celebrate my dad's birthday, and while I was home, the world pretty much was like, "Yeah, we're shutting down everything." Rudy Gobert touching microphones and then testing positive for COVID, and everything shutting down pretty much that week. But yeah, I talked about this world tour thing. I think I actually talked about the original world tour, if you remember that. That one was even crazier than the one that they actually went with, because there were even more events. But the CDL World Tour was a pretty bold, ambitious idea.
This isn't the same thing.
I think this was like a reduced version, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think so, but maybe.
But either way, the CDL originally planned to go to every single one of these cities that had a CDL team and do events almost every single weekend. And that obviously did not end up happening because, COVID happened. We went online for like a year and a half, I think, because Champs 2020 was online, which is very weird. And I think that's the biggest Champs prize pool, or one of them. And then 2021, it was not until like the very end of the season that they went back on LAN. And obviously things have been completely different since. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on this, if you had any memories of, when you found out that the world was shutting down because of COVID.
No, I just that was crazy. I mean, we were kind of talking about it earlier when we were saying like Attach won his world championship 9 years ago. Now it's officially been 4 years ago to the day that the CDLs and our season moved online. It seems like time is flying.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, we're 4 years older, which sucks. And Call of Duty is, I don't know, 4 years removed from. I don't know if this was a good idea, the World Tour or not. Like, it definitely is better than a few events, every few months in mostly the same places. But I think the players had a pretty rightful gripe that this was a lot to expect of them to fly every week or every other week, sometimes across the world. That seemed like a little too much, but obviously things have changed quite a bit in the last 4 years. But yeah, that about does it for the show. A little bit longer show. We did have that Shotzzy thing that we were talking about. And, we had some really banger matches like Atlanta versus LAT 3-0, New York versus LAG 3-0, Atlanta versus Boston 3-0. I mean, we have to spend a lot of time talking about the greatest matches in our esports history. We just can't gloss over them. So thank you guys for watching or listening. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the podcast feed, wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. Next show will be sometime early next week. Hoping to kind of nail this down onto like a Sunday night live show and then have the podcast upload on Monday morning. But, obviously playing it by ear, and we'll let you know if we nail it down and start doing that on a consistent basis. I'm sure people would like for us to be more consistent, but I wasn't even home this weekend, so that played into it, at least for this week. But thank you guys all for listening and watching, and Bink, take it away.
Yep, I don't have much else to add. It was a fun show and some good stuff to talk about. But yeah, like we said at the beginning, we're almost there. Almost got another LAN. And next episode, you can look forward to us finally having a bracket to break down. I know Preston really likes the preview shows. Hopefully, you guys do as well. So that's what you got to look forward to next week. But yeah, until then, thank you as always for all the support. And remember to send the chow.